Hello, in this video I want to talk about the best item I've ever crafted in Path of Exile, and the worst crafting experience I've ever had, probably in any game. Before we dive into the video, I just want to add a quick note from the future here. Most of this video was scripted and recorded before ExileCon, so a lot of the opinions that I express in this video are not really reflective of my opinions after seeing ExileCon. And I'm not really going to go into specifics on what that means, but in general, I was pretty happy with what I saw from ExileCon. This is Torment Edge. It is a double deck stacking one-handed sword. It has the deck stacking synthesis implicit and the deck stacking Crucible node. As far as I am aware, this is the best deck stacking sword that has ever existed in Path of Exile. I don't know if that qualifies it as a mirror tier item, but what I do know is that it took about 600 hours to craft. This is the reason my channel went quiet for a while for the last couple of months, even though I had more videos planned. I was planning to just finish this project, put out the crafting video, and then move on to other ideas. I had no idea that this would consume so much of my time, and that was only the first of many mistakes along the way. So before I go into too much detail on the process, let's just talk about the finished sword. It has 3 synthesis implicits, deck stacking cold damage, damage per endurance charge, and a little bit of fire resist. Out of those, only the deck stacking mod really matters, but the damage per endurance charge can be a solid amount of damage if you stack endurance charges. It has tier 1 crit chance, tier 1 crit multiplier, and essenced attack speed, which is actually better than tier 1. It has a perfect rolled elemental penetration prefix from an Ashling Unveil, and crafted cold damage with perfect rolls. The fire damage prefix is obviously garbage, and a naturally rolled cold damage mod could roll much higher than the crafted mod, but I'll talk about how these mods could be improved later. For now, let's talk about the Crucible tree. First, we have the deck stacking cold damage node. When I said this took 600 hours to craft, this is why. Almost all of that time was spent on this. I'll explain why later, but suffice to say that the Crucible mechanic is very time consuming and very stingy with good mutations. Next, it has 25% reduced attack speed and a 30% chance to deal double damage. Reduced attack speed is a little annoying, but this mod is easily a net win in DPS. Also, it increases the top-end damage potential significantly, which increases the threshold of enemies you can freeze and stun, which is useful for our next node. Next, we have reduced enemy stun threshold and endurance charge on stun. It might not sound like much, but endurance charge generation can be hard to come by, and remember, we have a damage per endurance charge implicit for a little bonus. Combine the reduced enemy stun threshold with the double damage modifier, and I'm pretty sure this will be able to stun anything short of pinnacle bosses, and maybe even them. Next, it has -8 to all elemental resistances and 10% elemental penetration. The 8% penalty is really easy to overcome, it's just 24% total elemental resistance we need to make up for on our gear. The 10% elemental penetration is obviously a huge DPS increase to just about any elemental build. In fact, other than the deck stacking mod on here, it's probably the biggest DPS increase that's even possible on this tree. Other than the next node, actually. Finally, for the tier 5 node, we have Profane Ground from Consecrated Path and Purifying Flame. The way to use this is to link Arcanist Brand with Purifying Flame, and the Arcanist Brand will keep casting Purifying Flame and keep creating Profane Ground. Profane Ground gives enemies -10% to all elemental resistances, and hits against them have a 100% increased crit chance. The way that I understand this to work is that because the crit chance is a debuff on the enemies and not a buff on your character, it acts sort of like a separate multiplier on your character's crit chance. In most cases, it's like doubling your total crit chance, so very strong. Combine the -10 all resist from Profane Ground with the tier 4 node for another -10, and then the elemental penetration prefix for another -16, and this sword effectively has a total of 36% elemental penetration. So that's the sword. I would be proud of what I created here, but I can't be proud of how much time I spent on it. The prefixes could still be improved though. The way to improve them would be to craft suffixes cannot be changed, then use an Orb of Annulment hoping to remove the fire damage. If it removes the crafted meta mod, then repeat. If it removes the fire damage, then hit it with an Exalted Orb and hope it hits a good modifier. The dream would be tier 1 cold damage. And if it does hit that mod, then just fix the crafted mod and it's done. If, however, it hits a garbage mod, which is much more likely, then I would have to repeat from the Orb of Annulment step. If the Orb of Annulment removes the elemental penetration, then I would have to take it to another Ashling bench in Betrayal to get the mod back, and repeat until it's perfectly rolled again. Eventually, after dozens, maybe hundreds of Annuls, Exalted Orbs, and Ashling benches, I might finally have better prefixes, and that's why I've stopped here, especially after all the time I've put into it. So I just want to talk about the actual crafting process and how this all started. Originally, I just wanted to make a deck stacking cold Wild Strike character using Combat Focus and Vengeance Cascade. Unfortunately, while leveling that character, I was reminded that Wild Strike projectiles are hard-coded to never hit the same target as the melee strike, which effectively meant the build idea was dead. It didn't work with Vengeance Cascade. If you happen to be a Mathel viewer, you might be thinking he already tested that on stream. I know, because I was the one in his chat who warned him about it, prompting him to test it because I had already tested it. Regardless, I had already bought the base synthesized sword, and I could still swap to something like Reeve or Flicker Strike, so I decided to switch focus to crafting the best weapon that I could. The reason that I chose a sword over a claw or an axe is simply because the base was cheaper to buy. I searched for a sword with the deck stacking synthesis implicit plus any 2 other synthesis implicits, and just bought the best one I could find. I think this cost about 2 divine for the base. I thought it would be easier to start with the synthesized base and add the Crucible node, rather than getting the Crucible node first and then using Harvest Beasts to synthesize and re-roll the implicits. That was my second and most crucial mistake. So I checked the trade website for any non-unique swords that had the deck stacking Crucible node, so I could try melting them down onto this base to transfer the mod. Unfortunately, all of those swords were absurdly expensive. There was exactly one available for about 20 divine and was offline when I checked. The rest were all 50 divine minimum. So it was time to start my journey collecting and merging as many swords as I could, trying to find the deck stacking implicit. I started just picking up every one-handed sword I could find from maps and delve, and storing them away to put crucible trees on them, and then I would take each one into a map, do a full crucible, get the crucible tree on it, and once I had a good inventory, I started randomly melting them together until I had one with the deck stacking node. And that was my third mistake. After a few hundred combined swords, I had the deck stacking node on one, but still not on my synthesized base, so I had to merge them together. I used a fractured fossil to split the sword that had the deck stacking crucible node, so I would have 2 chances to transfer the node. So I melted them both down onto my synthesized base, and they both failed. So then I decided I had to change my approach. I started to organize all of the crucibled swords I had by which useful nodes they had, depending on which tier that node was in, and you see the remainder of that in my stash here. Once I had a large inventory again, I started melting them directly onto my synthesized base, trying to keep the resulting crucible tree at least pretty good. The reason I didn't do this originally is because I had already crafted the base into something that I was hesitant to lose, and that was the image that's on screen now. This was Blightbeak. This was the older version of this sword before it had the Crucible deck stacking node. I was pretty happy with this at the time, but I knew that I could make it a lot better. Obviously, just getting this one node wouldn't risk the original item, but eventually when I would fix the rest of the Crucible tree, I would need to imprint beasts to protect the deck stacking node, which meant I would need to scour the explicit mods off of Blightbeak, the old sword, the old version of the sword. At this point though, I was more interested in just getting the deck stacking node onto this base. So after a few hundred more combined swords, I finally had the deck stacking node on this base. Keep in mind when I say a few hundred swords, I picked up each one of those and ran a crucible and a map for every single one to get crucible trees on them. This is why this took so long. Also, just a quick note in editing here, I also had to keep up a decent supply of currency in order to sustain this project, which meant that I wasn't just rushing the crucibles on these maps, I was actually clearing what I needed to in them as well in order to farm currency. So that of course made this project take even longer. Also, this was hundreds of forges of the titans that I had to run. In total, I used about 100 divine worth of igneous geodes for this, of which I bought about half. The other half were dropped from all of the crucible encounters that I ran. So with the deck stacking node locked in, it was time to fix the rest of the crucible tree. I scoured the explicit mods off of the original item, Blightbeak, so that I could use an imprint beast to imprint the item, preserving the deck stacking node so that I wouldn't risk losing it. Then I started using the swords I had saved up and organized to melt down other good crucible nodes onto this sword. If I lost the deck stacking node, I restored the imprint, then used another imprint beast and tried again. I started from the tier 5 node and worked backwards, since the tier 5 nodes are a lot rarer, and with each successful node combination, the next merge would become less likely to succeed without breaking anything. After 14 imprint beasts, I had 4 of the 5 nodes I wanted. It took about another 25 imprint beasts to get the final node. At 3 divine per beast, that's almost 120 divine worth of imprint beasts. Remember, I bought the original 2 divine sword because it was cheaper, and we are now at about 220 divine invested, plus a ton of time. Now that the crucible tree was finished, it was time to craft the explicit mods to finish the item. I bought 10 divine worth of deafening essences of zeal, or a little over 400 of them. Essence attack speed rolls higher than natural rolls can go, so that's why I specifically chose this essence. I planned on rolling them until I landed on tier 1 crit chance. So I typed Incision in the search bar, which is the name of the tier 1 crit chance modifier, and I started rolling, waiting for it to highlight the item. And you might notice that right now the item is not highlighted. After about 80 essences with no highlight, I remembered that sometimes the stash search doesn't really highlight items correctly, so I started rolling more slowly while carefully checking the modifiers. After just about 5 more essences, I somehow rolled both tier 1 crit chance and tier 1 crit multiplier together. This was just insanely lucky, but to be honest, it's about time something went well with this project. So I looked at these suffixes and I realized that there was about a 1 in 40 chance to divine them all perfect, but I only had about 25 divine left and still had to do some crafting. I used 20 divine to try to get better rolls, but I had to stop here when I was getting low. It had an open prefix, so it was time to craft suffixes cannot be changed and take it to the Ashling bench. It took 2 attempts at the Ashling bench to get this perfectly rolled elemental penetration. Then I crafted the flat cold damage, and here we are. And as I mentioned earlier, the prefixes could still be made better, primarily by just repeating Annul, Exalt, and Ashling bench depending on what happens. Probably dozens of Ashling benches, dozens of Annuls and Exalteds, until it finally gets something like a high tier, natural, flat added cold damage mod. But after all the time I've spent on this, I am done. So, in conclusion, I spent a completely absurd amount of time creating the best item I've ever crafted, maybe one of the best items in Path of Exile. During most of this process, I was just miserable, bored, and frustrated. I'm usually willing to defend crafting in this game, but I can't defend the Crucible mechanic. It's extremely powerful, but unbelievably tedious to interact with. Probably the most frustrating thing about this to me is that if someone from GGG focused on player retention were to look at my account activity, they would see that I spent hundreds more hours in this league than I normally do in most seasons, and they would probably think that is a player retention success. In reality, I think this is the closest I've been to quitting the game for good in years. I don't know if I'll play next season at all because of how exhausting this was, but at least there's PoE 2 to look forward to. This is effectively the end of the video. I wish I could end on a higher note. The rest of the video is footage that I collected along the way of the whole process, so if you're interested in seeing more of what I was thinking and feeling during this whole journey, feel free to stick around. Either way, thanks for watching. You could have clicked on any video on YouTube, but you clicked on this one, and I appreciate that. Oh, recording some footage for a crafting project here. So I've been collecting swords and putting a crucible tree on all of them. I did this, I crucibled all of these myself, so this took quite a while. There's around 100 swords in this tab, give or take. None of these have any special nodes on them, really. Like, this one sells for a geode. None of them have, like, a divine on them or anything. The ones that do have the special nodes, I've been setting aside over here. Like, this one sells for 3 divine. I've already split it. I only found this one and one other sword that sells for a divine while doing this. And the reason I'm doing all this is because I'm trying to get the dex stacking node on a sword. I've been keeping an eye on trade for them. They're really expensive. They've been like 30 div minimum all league. And I want to craft it onto a project I'm working on. I actually already have the uncrucibled item crafted that I'm going to put the crucible tree on. So I might end up needing to do this more than once if I don't get the node that I want. Hopefully I can get the dex stacking node. Hopefully at least I get one of the attribute stacking nodes, because swords can also have the strength stacking node. And the other thing I've been doing is any swords that have... and actually, real quick, the dex stacking node is a tier 1 node. That means it appears at the beginning of the tree. But you can only get it by combining swords. You cannot get it on... Sorry, you can only get it by combining items that can have that node. It cannot spawn naturally. It has to come from combining them in one of the remnants. And like I said, it's been way too expensive to buy all league. I could actually buy it at this point because of how much currency I've accrued during this project. But at this point, I want to continue my experiment. And so I've set aside all of these swords that have anything to do with cold or dex or attributes on their first node. And I've been experimenting, keeping a spreadsheet to see what happens when you combine these. Is there a specific combination that unlocks that node, or is it just completely random? And so far, results are inconclusive, but so far it just looks completely random. It doesn't look like you can really influence which mod mutations happen, or which ones, like which nodes mutate, or which nodes they mutate into. So at this stage of the experiment, I am going to be smashing all of these swords together in Crucibles, in these remnants. I'm going to need a lot more remnants in this probably, because there's about 100 swords here, and there's not 100 remnants here. So I'll probably have to buy a whole bunch of them, but I just wanted to record this real quick as part of the crafting process. And once I'm done smashing all these together, I am going to make a follow-up clip to this, showing how many successes I had, if any. Even if I got like the strength stacking node, I will show that, because that is also a pretty acceptable result, but I am looking for the dex stacking node. So that's it for this part of the video, and I am going to spend a whole lot of time smashing these together in Crucible forges now. Okay, this is the first follow-up to the first follow-up to smashing all those swords together. I've put all of the swords that were in this tab into the Crucible at least once, and I've set aside all of the ones that had either skill upgrades or mutations, just in case that upgrading or mutating multiple times is part of getting the stat stacking nodes. So far, I have not seen a single stat stacking node. I've gone through around 100 Crucibles or so. I had to buy a bunch more remnants. I bought them as geodes in bulk. They've gone up quite a bit. It was 11 or 12 geodes to 1 divine. I spent 9 divine and I got 93 of them. So far, no stat stacking nodes. I will be doing all of these next. These are the ones that either had mutations or upgrades on them, but I didn't get any of the... In fact, I don't think I saw any mutated nodes that were mutation-only nodes. I saw some mutations, but I'm pretty sure they were all nodes that you could get normally. I still have all of the ones that I set aside as dex or cold related nodes. So like this one is cold damage, and I'm still working on plugging these into a spreadsheet. So if it does come from one of these, then it's going... So if the node requires one of these, then I'm not going to see it until I do this part. But so far it doesn't look like any... So far, it doesn't look like there's any way to influence what mutations you see. So I doubt that this is the correct path either. I think it is just random. I have a bunch more of these remnants still to go through. These ones I set aside because they cannot regen and I can't run them. I also set aside any of the swords that had like sell for Divine Orb or sell for like 30 seconds. I think there were only 2 or 3 of those. If they didn't have anything like that, I just put them back in the tab and I just kept going, kept rolling them onto each other. I alternated between like using the same base a bunch of times and putting something onto it, or just like alternating which item is the donor item and just like having it only go one step at a time. Just like having a node only combined onto it once and then using that as a donor weapon for the next one. I've alternated between those just in case that influenced anything. It doesn't look like it does anything. It seems to just be a random 50-50 between which node it picks. Although it does feel like some of the nodes, particularly the damage over time one, it feels like some of them have a higher likelihood of getting picked out of the 2 nodes, so maybe it's not just 50-50. Anyway, so the next step is to go through these. These are the ones that either upgraded or mutated. See if that does anything, and then if not, I'm going to keep going through all of the ones that I set aside with cold and dex nodes and see if I can find a stat stacking node. So far, no luck. This is pretty frustrating. This has taken a long time because, I mean, just getting the swords together, getting a Crucible tree on all of them, that was like a week of gameplay for me. And then going through all these remnants, this has taken hours already. I've actually gone to sleep and got back up and continued going. So I'm going to keep going, and hopefully I see a stat stacking node and I will report my findings. Okay, quick follow-up for the next part of the sword smashing and crafting. I have pretty much smashed all of the swords together that I can, including the cold and dex ones that I had set aside here. I bought another 62 geodes for 6 divine, turned them all into remnants. We used about a third of them, so I'm well over 100 remnants that I've gone through now. 100 forges, probably like 150. Still not a single attribute stacking node. I am about ready to give up on this. I'm gonna show the spreadsheet real quick. So this is the spreadsheet for the cold and dex and attribute combining weapons thing. What I did was I made a column for donor weapon, recipient weapon, and I decided I would do like 5 of each combination. You can see I have not even come close to doing 5 of each because it's just a lot. It's a ton of weapon smashing to do, and this is not including the like 100 swords with various modifiers, with various Crucible nodes on them that I just combined. Those are entirely separate from this. But I don't think I'll be finishing this spreadsheet because a long time ago I promised myself if a game ever started feeling like a job, I would quit immediately. And we're getting real close to that. If anyone maybe wants this spreadsheet, maybe wants to pick up the torch on this, let me know, and I will see about copying this into Google Sheets. But yeah, there's a lot to fill out here still. And if you go through this, you'll see that mutations and upgrades are quite uncommon. And you need, not only do you need a mutation to get the dex stacking node, you need a specific mutation, and it has a pretty small weight. If I bring up PoEDB, so this is the list of all of the Crucible nodes you can get on a weapon, and here is the adds cold damage per 10 dex. If I hover over this, you can see this is not the two-handed weapon version because it has two-handed weapon 0. It has sword 500. So the weight for getting this on a sword is 500 on a one-handed sword. This one, I believe, is the two-handed modifier. Yeah, so this says one-handed weapon 0, which means this is only for two-handed swords. So we can ignore this one. So it has a weight of 500, and while not all of these modifiers can spawn on swords, if we look through this list just at some random modifiers, like say this chaos damage, you can see like this has a weight of 500, and this one here, this lightning damage, this has a weight of 1,000. This can be on any one-handed weapon, and this list is huge, right? There's tons of things that have a weight of 1,000 or more on this list, and I'm not gonna like sit here and go through every single node, like hover over all of them to see can this be on a sword, to figure out what the total weight for swords is, because it's just not really a viable format to do that. But the gist of it is that the weight is probably in the many thousands. The total pool is probably in the many thousands, and we're looking at 500 out of however many thousand. Although we're also only looking at tier 1 mods, all these ones that say T1. I think this is in order, and if you scroll down, it gets to T2 next. So it's everything above. This is T2. It's everything above like this point here. So everything, if we scroll up from here, like from this point where my mouse cursor is, everything above this that can be on a sword, on a one-handed sword, contributes to the total pool. And it's just a lot, right? Not only do you need to get a mutation that is rare, I'm finding that mutations are very rare, it has to be on the right node on your tree, and it has to hit that specific 500 weight node. This is just absurd. This is so frustrating and just asinine to try to intentionally craft anything. I have a pretty strong opinion now that although Crucible is powerful, it is one of the worst implementations of a crafting mechanic ever. Second only to Old Harvest. And I have a ton of opinions on Old Harvest. I won't get into it, but I hated Old Harvest. Anyway, so at this point, I think too frustrated to continue trying to force this node to appear. And I think I'm just going to buy whichever swords I can that have the node on it, and then hope I get the combination onto the weapon that I want it on, because unfortunately I have to do it that way with what I'm crafting. And like I said, so far those swords have been 30 divine each, at least. Sometimes they're up for way more than that. Hopefully I'll only need 1 or 2 of them. I have plenty of currencies, so it's not really an issue. But I have put way more time and effort into this than anyone should ever be reasonably considered to put into crafting an item, like especially one single mod on an item. That this league mechanic, this implementation is just terrible. Like it is awful, and I hate it. And I need to stop ranting there before it gets too unhinged. And this reminds me of Synthesis, in that back in Synthesis League, we had a really similar crafting mechanism where we could combine different modifiers. You combine different fractures, and then depending on which fracture you combined, it would give you a different synthesis implicit. But it was deterministic. It was inconsistent and weird in that the fractured mods that combined into specific synthesized mods often had nothing to do with the synthesis mod you were trying to get. But by this point in the league, by this time, because we're over a month into the league now, and by this point in Synthesis League, the community had already mapped out a spreadsheet of every single synthesis that you can make. Every synthesized mod that you can get, we know how to get it. A lot of them don't make sense, and a lot of people don't like that we need this giant spreadsheet, but at least we know how to do it. And in this system, Crucible, there's just no reliability whatsoever. This is one of the least deterministic methods of crafting we've ever had, in a time where the biggest complaint about this game is how random the crafting is, and how little access we have to deterministic crafting. And I don't want and like I said, I don't want Old Harvest, I don't want an item editor, but if I want to get a single mod on an item and I put a week of gameplay into it and a pile of currency or more on one item, and I don't get it, that's insane. Anyway, I'm done ranting. This is a follow-up recording to the last one about putting a bunch of Crucible trees on swords. I managed to calm myself down a bit after that rant, and decided that I would just get another full quad tab of swords. These have all been crucibled again, just like last time. I put Crucible trees on all of these myself. I decided not to go ahead and buy the deck stacking node on a sword, because I just decided I had better things to spend my currency on. Like I got my Mage Blood. And I will probably need to buy a bunch of geodes again. These were pretty expensive last time. These are the ones that I picked up this time, but last time I had to buy them at about 12 per divine. And this is not going to be enough to combine all of these swords. And I'm not exactly sitting on a pile of currency this time, since I just bought a Mage Blood. So you can see no divines here, not that much chaos. I do have like quite a bit of convertible other currencies. Like there's a lot of essences I could turn into currency here. So just showing here that I have another full tab, and I'm about to smash all of these together just like last time and see if I can get that deck stacking node. I've also continued to keep track of all of the swords that have like cold or attribute or dex nodes on them, and just set them aside. And then I have a spreadsheet of the combinations that I've been doing of those, and if I happen to stumble across a specific combination that gives the deck stacking node, then great. But so far it doesn't look like anything is going to come out of that. What I did notice while I was doing this is that seemingly the rarest node to get on the first node for a sword is the +1 dex gems. And the first time I ever heard of someone getting the deck stacking node in a Twitch chat, I remember that they said they combined a dex gems node and a cold damage node, which is what prompted me to do this in the first place. But I just hadn't seen any luck with it yet. But it makes sense. And so since this is so rare, this +1 dex gems, I think I'm going to focus on combining these first and see what it does. I'm probably going to buy a whole bunch of these that have the +1 dex gems. Unfortunately, it looks like they are anywhere from 20 chaos to 80 chaos right now, and the people selling them for 20 chaos are mostly AFK because it's so late in the league. So I imagine I'll be buying these for like at least 50 chaos a piece, which means I'm going to need to get some currency first. So anyway, yeah, we're about to do another 100 plus swords in the Crucible Forge and just see what happens. Hopefully I get a deck stacking out. I really hope that I don't end up just doing this twice for nothing. But I will report back what I find. I got it. So I went through about this many geodes. This many swords are still left, and I finally got adds 1 to 3 cold damage to attacks with this weapon per 10 dexterity. Finally. Only took like 200 swords or something. I don't know. So unfortunately, this doesn't guarantee that I get it on the weapon that I actually want it on, because I've already crafted the weapon that I want this on. Even though this is really valuable as it is, the weapon that I've already crafted is probably way more valuable, and I'll get to that when I finally get to the actual weapon. So the next step now is to use a split beast on this, get 2 of them, scour the old tree off of the weapon that I am trying to craft, and then Crucible merge this onto that weapon and hope that it rolls the cold damage per dex onto that weapon. What I'm going to do is you can go to a Crucible Forge in a map, and when you open it, when you see the tree like this on a weapon that already has a tree, you can actually use an Orb of Scouring on any of the nodes, and it will just remove all of the experience up to that node. So it's like unspecking the node. It's basically like using an Orb of Regret on your passive tree. So I'm going to use Scour all the way down to the bottom of the tree, and then merge this onto that weapon. And supposedly by scouring the first node off of the other weapon, it should make this one more likely to be chosen as the node that goes on that weapon. And then if it doesn't, then I'll use the split copy of this weapon to try again. And then if it doesn't, then I'll be frustrated. Anyway, as it is, this is worth about 30 divine from what I've seen, just having this node on a one-handed sword. So, like I said, next thing is to split this, and then hopefully I get it on the first try when I go to Crucible merge it with the other weapon. And then I can sell the split copy for maybe 30 divine, and then I'll at least have some currency again. And actually, worth mentioning, this node came from just smashing 2 random nodes together. These were not the cold or dex nodes that I was setting aside. Like I said, I wanted to buy more of these dex gems swords before I smash these together, and I just didn't really have currency right now, so I decided to just go straight into smashing all of these swords together, which just have like whatever node on them: lightning damage, more lightning damage, physical damage, just anything. So it doesn't seem to matter what you smash together in the Crucible. It's just random and extremely rare, because this is somewhere around 200 Crucible merges to get this. So next step is to split it, and then try to merge it, and then if it fails, try again with the split copy, and then hopefully I have it on the weapon that I actually want it on, and hopefully it works on the first try, and then I can just sell the split copy. Before that, I'm going to keep merging all of these swords, just in case I hit it again, because I already did this anyway, so might as well keep going. And again, I'll report back what I find. Okay, here we are. We've made it to what will hopefully be the final step of this crafting process. This is the weapon that I'll be crafting on. I set up this tree to be as good as my sanity will allow it to be. I already have my 2 swords with the deck stacking cold node. I used a split fossil to get 2 of them. I said I was going to use a split beast, but I had a split fossil. I'm not sure which one was cheaper, but I just had the fossil, so I used a fossil. So I do get 2 attempts at this, and I've intentionally scoured off every node off of this tree, so that, in theory, from what we understand so far of the Crucible, because this node is not allocated, it should be more likely to choose this node when combining them in the Crucible. On the other hand, unfortunately, because I've done that, it means that all of these nodes aren't any more likely to be chosen, and these are all pretty much all good nodes, whereas the nodes on these trees are generally not very good. There are 3 vendor nodes here, so I definitely don't want to see these. However, this one node is more important than the rest of the entire tree combined. For the purpose of this deck stacking weapon, this node basically says 50% more dexterity. So the way I set this up was I started with the tier 5 nodes and then kind of worked my way backwards, adding the best nodes that I could on the way back towards the beginning of the tree. Previously, this was flat accuracy and 4% increased dexterity, but on my last merge, it either downgraded or mutated into just flat accuracy, which is still fine. I would rather get the dexterity back. So the tier 5 nodes, this is the best one. The Consecrated Path and Purifying Flame create Profane Ground. This can be used with basically any build. Profane Ground basically doubles your effective crit chance, and you can just put Purifying Flame on Arcanist Brand to keep uptime on it. The other ones here, Volcanic Fissure and Molten Strike, it's not a very good node, but Molten Strike at least is a pretty good skill in the current meta. This one down here doesn't really matter, Perforate or Lacerate. This weapon wouldn't be used with either of those skills. And then here I've got 4% increased dexterity on either path, so it doesn't really matter which way I go here. This is the only really bad node on this tree, I guess, besides the Perforate and Lacerate one. I don't really care about AoE on this weapon. Attack speed here, this doesn't really matter because it's an empty path, but these paths can change when you combine weapons. This increased explicit elemental damage modifier is actually kind of nice because it works on the elemental penetration modifier. So ideally, what I want to happen is this node turns into cold damage per 10 dexterity. Ideally, this node either upgrades or mutates back into the flat accuracy and 4% increased dex. This node can stay as it is. That's pretty much what I want. I think you can also get a 4% dex here, but this is fine too. This node I just want to stay as it is, and this node I want to stay as it is. So ideally, this is the path. It'll be this hat path here, and with a deck stacking node here. So I'm gonna hop into a Forge of the Titans, run up to the Crucible, and see what happens. I do get 2 attempts at this. Both attempts could completely triangle this entire tree, but getting the deck stacking node, if I do get it, it's worth it. So hopefully I get it, because each one of these deck stacking weapons that I'm about to throw into this thing is worth about 30 divine. And I realized as I was doing this that the smarter way to have done this, would have been to just have been smashing all of the swords that I was trying in the Crucible onto this weapon that I'm trying to craft until it gets the deck stacking node. The problem with doing it that way is that I wouldn't be able to add on to the tree after that, because once I have that deck stacking node, anything after that is not worth the risk of losing the deck stacking node. So hopefully this turns out to be the correct path, and I create something really nice here. Okay, here we go. Attempt number 1. This is a 30 divine sword, and it's gone. I don't see the deck stacking node. And I see 2 vendor nodes that I don't want to see. That's bad. That's fine. That's bad. That's fine. It's not as good as 4% increased dex, but it's fine. The Consecrated Path is still there, which is good. My options at this point are, I can either keep the Profane Ground node here and just try again right away, or I can scour this whole tree off and get like a good tree on here again. However, I don't know if my sanity can take that. This has taken so much time already, but I am trying to create something actually special. So I think that's what I'm going to do, which means I am not going to get to do the other one right now. So I'm going to cut the recording here and then come back with another 30 Divine Gamble. Okay, here we are with attempt number 2 on the merge. This time I went ahead and bought a Primordial Remnant that has passives are more likely to be retained when forging. Now, I don't know actually if this works in the way that I want it to, but there's a chance that it does. And since I'm using a 30 Divine Gamble, it's worth taking that chance. This Remnant cost me 5.5 Divine. And here's our 30 Div sword because it has the deck stacking node on it. And I'm going to merge that onto this sword, which has no nodes allocated. And we have a tree it's decent. We have 5% dex. This totem mod is not really good for the build it would be used on. It's good on like the explodey totem build, but it's not good really for like a deck stacking build for basically anything. Unless you were to do like an actual totem build, like say like an ancestor totem with deck stacking, then it could be pretty fine. Socketed gems are supported by level 25 Divine Blessing here. This is fine. I don't really have a use for it specifically, but it's still fine. And then we have the Volcanic Fissure and Molten Strike one. This is good, like I said before, and the Molten Strike one is good this league. I would rather have the Profane Ground from Purifying Flame, but that one is quite rare, and I just got tired of buying swords that had that on the tree and then leveling them to 5. Even buying a sword that had that on the tree was getting up to 100 plus chaos because I had pretty much bought out the market of all of them, and I had already used all of the ones that I had myself. So mainly the only really good node we have here is this 5% increased dex and then the accuracy. And then we want this to turn into the dex stacking node from this sword. And then from the rest of the sword, I don't really care. I don't really want these vendor nodes. They're completely useless. The 12% quality is pretty decent, and the 40% increased attack speed and 20% less global damage would actually probably be pretty good here. I'm not sure how well it would work out, but I'm pretty sure it would at least be a net positive. Anyway, the only important thing here is that we get this node onto this sword. So, once more, 30 Divine Gamble, starting now. Here we go. Come on. 30 div. Melted down. Please, please, please. No! The rest of the tree stayed, at least. And all that happened was the rest of the tree stayed, and it added the vendor nodes, which is like the worst thing that could have happened. Now I wonder, since the rest of the tree stayed, I wonder if this forge that I used actually has the opposite effect of what I wanted. Maybe it makes the weapon more likely to keep the nodes that are on the recipient weapon. However, why would you ever want that? The whole point is to put new nodes onto the weapon when you're merging. And these forges are 5.5 divine to buy, so that doesn't sound right either. So that's another 30 div gone. Thankfully I didn't actually buy it. I just smashed swords together until I had the base and then split it myself. But that did take forever. In fact, I could easily farm 30 div faster than the amount of time it took me to actually acquire those bases. I think at this point what I do next is I liquidate some items for currency, and then I buy 1 or 2 more bases with the deck stacking node, split them again, either with a fossil or with a beast, and then try 2 to 4 more times, depending on if I get 1 that I can split or 2 that I can split. And then if it still doesn't work, I might just give up and maybe just finish off my challenges for the league, and then while I'm doing that, any more swords that I get, maybe I'll just randomly smash them onto this sword in forges and hope that I can just directly put the deck stacking node on this sword. The drawback to doing it that way is that I would not really be able to get a decent tree beyond the first node. It would just be the first node and then entirely random, probably garbage nodes after that. The first node does matter a lot more than the other nodes, so it wouldn't be the worst thing, but I would rather have like an actually good tree plus the deck stacking node. And while I'm going through this, I'm realizing some mistakes that I've made along the way while I'm crafting this, and I'm going to wait until the very end of this crafting process and video, I think, to go into more detail and talk about what the mistakes were, what I could have done better, in case this sort of mechanic happens to go core, which I don't think it will, or in case anyone is still playing by the time I'm done this and wants to learn from my mistakes. Okay, following up with another recording. It's been a couple weeks, actually. About a week I didn't really play because of the Street Fighter 6 release, but still been grinding away at trying to craft the sword. I actually already went through an entire extra quad tab of swords that I didn't record, and I didn't really get anything. After failing to combine the mod onto the sword that I wanted, what I decided to do was to just combine random swords onto that sword until I get the mod on that sword. The benefit of that is that I don't have to play that gamble again where I just lose the deck stacking mod for basically no reason. The drawback to that method is that I have to pass up a lot of otherwise good trees. I've had to pass up the Socketed Gems are supported by Enlighten already. I've passed up the lowest attribute stacking chaos damage mod, and a bunch of other just like overall really good trees that I just couldn't keep because they didn't have the deck stacking mod. So I decided just to plug random swords into the sword that I'm trying to craft. Went through a whole quad tab, didn't get it. And after I finished that, I realized that the better way to do this, actually, is to separate these swords by what the best modifier on them is. So, like, these are tier 2s because they don't really have anything better after that. But, like, there's attack speed here, there's evasion and accuracy. These are not great, but it's the best mod on this sword. So, I separated them like this so that I can sort of craft the tree while I'm going. And I'll start from the lowest tier. Because the only mod I really care about is the tier 1, the deck stacking mod. But after that, it would be nice to have other good mods. So the reason I'll start from the tier 2 is because, say I start from tier 5 and I get like a really good tier 5, but I also hit the deck stacking mod, then I can't change that tree because it's too risky to lose the deck stacking mod. And at that point, if the tier 2 is something that bricks the sword, like your crits don't do extra damage, then the tier 5 doesn't matter. I can't even get to it. So at that point, it would only have the tier 1 mod. On the other hand, because I'm doing it this way, if I want to really spend a lot more currency on this, I will be able to scour the resulting sword, just keeping the Crucible tree and the implicits, which are the things that really matter. Although it is crafted really nicely right now. But I'll be able to scour it and imprint it, so then I'll be able to actually craft a tree, like a proper tree on it, and never worry about losing the deck stacking node. The problem with that is that I lose the current craft on the sword, which is already very, very good. It's not perfect, but it's very, very good. Anyway, so I've counted all of these. There are 190 swords here, and these are just separated because there's not that many tier 5s. So the only tier 5s I really cared about were mainly is the Consecrated Path one, and I think I also did the Smite and Static Strike one, because Static Strike is also good for deck stacking. So at this point, I will need about 190 geodes, actually more than that, because there will be some geodes that I can't use because they'll have the corrupted implicit. Like forged items are corrupted with an implicit, which I can't use that, it'll break the item. And also I want to avoid using the trees have a sell modifier, because that's just a wasted slot on a tree that I don't want to sell. So really, I'm going to need to have more than this. I've already spent, I think 9 more divine today buying these. I'm getting a bunch just from doing the mapping and like putting the crucible trees on these swords, but I do need to buy a bunch more. And at this point, I've bought out most of the market, most of the remaining market. It's pretty late in the league. There's not a whole lot of people playing, and I alone am driving up the price of these geodes by buying so many of them. I've actually had people message me saying, slow down, you're driving up the price. And I mean, there's nothing I can really do about it. I need a lot of these geodes for this. And funny enough, despite the fact that I'm approaching probably close to doing 1,000 crucibles now, these 5 crystalline geodes, well, I guess they're primordial remnants now because I opened them. These are the only ones I've found the entire league, and I've been full charging almost all of these crucibles, and I've only had 5 of these the entire league. These are incredibly rare. They're valuable, but they're incredibly rare. Anyway, so I just wanted to record that before hopping back into these forges. I'm going to open all of these geodes. Like I said, just speed run through these forges and smash these swords onto the sword that I'm trying to craft. Hopefully I get the deck stack into it, and hopefully I get a decent tree to go along with it. And I mentioned earlier in a previous recording that I couldn't run the no regen forges, but I can run those now because I have Mage Blood. I'm just speed running through the whole thing. I'm not even touching any of the monsters. The only ones I can't run, like I said, are the forged items have a corrupted implicit, and I would prefer to avoid the forged items have a vendor modifier. Anyway, back into the forges I go, and I will come back with the results. I finally got it. I am so happy right now. I wish I could be more energetic right now recording this because I'm a little bit sick. I have a bit of a fever. I finally got this on the item that I wanted on. After I stopped my last session of recording, where I said that I did like, how many swords did I say I did? Like 100 and something? I did another. So out of the swords I said I was going to do, however many I said I was going to do, I did not get the mod. And then I was like, well, I am this deep into it now, I'm going to keep going. I did another 230 swords. Still didn't get it. I collected another 240, and I am about 80 into that set, so about 300 total more. And I finally got it. Deck stacking, cold damage. On a synthesized weapon with deck stacking, cold damage. And the weapon as it is pretty beautiful. It is not perfect. And I could stop here, and this would still be basically the best deck stacking sword in the game. I could stop right here. However, at this point, I have put so much work into this that I feel like I should maybe keep going until it's actually perfect. It's at a point now where I can actually never lose this as long as I am careful with it. Because right now this tree is probably not that good. This is quality. This is attack speed, which is fine. Frenzy charge on kill is pretty nice, actually, because this would mainly be used for Flicker Strike. Endurance charge when you stun, this is actually really good, because you're going to stun a lot when you're doing this much damage, and it's just free endurance charge generation on a build that wouldn't normally have a lot of endurance charge generation. This is useless, and this is a vendor node. So, if I want to keep crafting this at this point, basically, I have a few options here at this point. Option 1 is just go down this path, get the attack speed and the frenzy charge on kill, get the endurance charges. And that's already a great weapon. However, I could push this a little bit farther, and there won't be another chance to push a weapon like this because this is a Crucible specific thing. I doubt Crucible's going core just because of how much power it adds. Crucible, although it is such a garbage mechanic to interact with, and that's going to be a focus of this video, I'm sure that this was just suffering. Although it's such a garbage mechanic to interact with, it adds more power than any other League mechanic we've seen since... I don't know, ever? Finally got it. Okay. So, option 2 is, sorry, I keep hesitating because it's hard to believe I've actually finally got this. It has been, I made this character basically just to do this, just to farm these, because it's a fast character that can do maps fast, it can do crucibles fast. I've been clearing the maps so that I have currency to maintain this because I have to keep buying geodes, and I haven't checked my slash played yet. I have played this character, oh god, I've played this character for 23 days and 16 hours. I've played this character for almost 600 hours in a single league. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about that anyway. Back to talking about the sword. Option 2 is I can modify this tree without losing this. However, in order to do that, I need to imprint this. And in order to imprint this, I need to scour it down to a magic item, which means I would lose the craft on it, which is a very good craft. It's not perfect, but it's about as good as it gets. Like, it is very close to perfect. The only like things that could make this better would be, my alt key is messed up. The only things that could make this better would be, I guess hits can't be evaded as one of the prefixes, but that doesn't really matter on a deck stacking weapon because you would get so much accuracy. A natural crit multi-roll would be nice, or I could change the crit multi to chance to deal double damage. Either of those is fine. And then a higher tier cold damage roll would also be nice. The +1 level socketed gems is pretty nice because you're usually going to put like a curse setup in your sword or like some kind of utility, and the level of those gems, it's pretty nice to increase them. So it's a very, very nice craft already. But it wasn't that hard to craft. I got exceedingly lucky while crafting it, but I only spent about maybe 5 divine worth of crafting materials to get it to this point. So I expect it would be significantly more than that if I tried again, like at least 20. I think I just got lucky. But with a weapon of this level, probably still worth it. So I would have to scour it down to a magic item and then imprint it. And then start merging it with other swords in the Crucible. And each time I'd have to check the tree, and if I don't get exactly what I want, I use the imprint to restore what it was before. And then I imprint it again. And I have to imprint it each time I want to make a single change to the tree, which is expensive. I'm not hurting on currency right now. I have plenty of currency. But again, for a weapon of this tier, probably worth it. This can probably turn into a mirror tier item if it isn't already. It probably already is. Even if I don't even put those 2 extra points in the tree. Even if I just leave it as it exactly is right now, this is probably already a mirror tier item. But it can be better. And because it can be better, I don't think I'll be satisfied until it is. Especially after I've spent almost 600 hours doing this. Okay, another update on the sword. We are getting close to the end. I mean, we've been close to the end ever since I got the deck stacking node, because that is by far the hardest part of this. Maybe the hardest part of crafting anything ever. I've got the Crucible tree now almost perfect. It has 4 out of 5 nodes that I want. I pulled the trigger on scouring the crafted mods off of this so that I could imprint it and then use those imprints to safely change the Crucible tree without losing anything. So the first thing I did on every step after getting the deck stacking node was I made an imprint of the sword, went into the menagerie, used a Cratiate Chimeral to make an imprint. Then once I was sure I had the imprint, and I always double checked it, then I take another sword that has a Crucible mod that I want on the correct path that I want. So at first it didn't matter which way I was going. I ended up working backwards because I got this Consecrated Path and Purifying Flame create Profane Ground node. And this is one of the most important nodes on the tree, probably the second most important after the deck stacking. And it's also one of the rarest nodes. If you search this on trade, there are very, very few swords that actually have this node. And when I was manually going through all of my own swords and putting Crucible trees onto all of them, I only saw this node maybe
8 times total out of the hundreds that I did. So once I had this, it was determined that I would be working backwards. So next node I got was this. This is the next best node that I could get on the tree. This is perfect. Attacks with the weapon penetrate 10% elemental resistances. That -8 all elemental resistances is annoying, but that's easy to overcome. That's not a big deal at all. And then this is ideally, this is what I want. I actually had a higher tier version of this previously where it was a 20% reduced enemy stun threshold. That doesn't really matter. This node is good because it allows you to sustain endurance charges even on bosses as long as you're doing enough damage to stun them. And with a weapon like this, you probably will be doing enough damage to stun them, and especially when you are reducing their stun threshold as well. So it's just a nice quality of life thing. Not even quality of life, it's a nice power thing that just allows you to have endurance charges on a build that maybe otherwise wouldn't. And if you choose to stack more endurance charges, remember that one of the synthesized mods on this is increased damage per endurance charge. That's not a lot of damage, but it is there. And then this node is the last node I need to change, because this is the deck stacking node. Obviously, this is not changing. So this is fine as it is. Accuracy, there's nothing wrong with that. However, as a deck stacker, you're going to have a lot of accuracy anyway, to the point that 150 doesn't really make a difference. But more importantly, there is a 5% increased dexterity node that I could get here. And that 5% dexterity node can also come with accuracy, and it can come with up to 240 accuracy. So it can actually just be better than this on top of having 5% dexterity. The problem I've run into is the number of imprints it requires to actually change this without messing up the rest of the tree. So I haven't decided if this is where this Crucible tree project ends, or if I'm just going to dump all of my currency into it. And I think I'm just going to dump all of my currency into it at this point. So what I need to do now is take a sword. Well, first I need to imprint this again because I don't have any imprint beasts left. Then I need to take another sword that has the 5% dex node on the bottom path here, on the second tier, and take it into a Crucible forge and combine them. And not only do I have to hope that it overwrites this with the dexterity, I have to hope it doesn't change this. In fact, I have to hope it doesn't change anything else on the tree. So it's like I'm flipping 5 coins and they all have to be right. And it's probably honestly a bit worse odds than that, because there's also possibilities of mutations and downgrades and all that. This node could safely be changed. There is a 6% dexterity node out there as well that is honestly overall probably better. Personally, I like this endurance charge node better, but 6% dex is a lot. Like on a dex stacker, that's going to be anywhere from like 75 to 150 dexterity, depending on your level of gear. So if I have a sword that had like the 5% dex node here and the 6% dex node here, and I got both of them, that would also be acceptable. Or even if like this one mutated into 6% dexterity, also acceptable. But the reason this has become a struggle is, to give you an idea, to get the rest of this tree set up, it took 14 imprint beasts, which is enough, but it's fine. I was able to afford it. I have now used 29 imprint beasts total, and the last 15 were just trying to get this node to the 5% dex, and it hasn't happened yet. Every time it's either failed, or I've got the 5% dex but lost something else on this. And I have to be very careful every time to make sure I have an imprint of this every single time, so that I don't lose the dex stacking node, which I spent like 600 hours getting. And imprint beasts are 3 divine each, so it's pretty expensive. So I've used about 30 of them, so about 90 divine, I guess 87 divine. This is an expensive project, obviously. I am getting low on raw divine currency. I have 21 left, so I can buy another 7 divine. I have lots of stuff to sell, though. I have tons and tons of essences. I have a bunch of harvest juice. I sold my yellow pretty recently. I had like 500,000 of it, and that's what's been mainly funding this, but I still have quite a bit of currency left in harvest juice. And then the big obvious thing that I have for extra currency if I need to liquidate is I have 4 harvest beast memories, and I have 4 sacred grove memories. So these are all quite valuable. The harvest beast memories are 5 divine, and the Sacred Grove memories are about 1.5 divine each. So this is 20 divine here, and then another 6 divine here, so about 26 about 26 divine left. And sorry for my voice. I still have the cold that I mentioned last time. It's only been about a day and a half since the last recording, and then I have a bunch of catalysts to sell off too. So I have, if I sold off everything, probably pretty easily 100 divine or so. Especially these sextants. I have 600 of them. I didn't even think about this. This is 16 divine worth of sextants. Honestly, the thing holding me back, besides just how much time I've already spent on this, because I don't want to spend so much more time on it with the amount of time I've already put into it. It's just exhausting at this point. But I also don't want to like settle for an incomplete project after the amount of time I put into it, which sunk cost fallacy and all that. But well, I don't really have an excuse there. But I do just want this sword to be actually as good as it can be.
Another note in editing here, I cut out a significant chunk of this part of the crafting journal retrospective because I went into some details about split beats that were completely wrong. I didn't know at the time that they couldn't be used on synthesized items, and I didn't want to leave that in the video and steer anyone in the wrong direction. So because of that, there's a bit of a cut in the video here that's going to sound jarring.
Or something. I doubt I'll open up a mirror service unless anyone really wants this mirrored. Just because I don't care about the currency at this point in the league. I would honestly just be happier to get this into the hands of people that want to use it. There is one other note actually that's really good here, and it's 10% attack speed. And when I was looking in PoB, my theory for this sword is to use it with Flicker Strike, and the 10% attack speed actually worked out to more damage than the 5% dex by quite a bit. On a completely theoretical build, like mirror tier stuff. So the kind of build where you would expect the percent dex to be more valuable, the 10% attack speed was still better. Just for damage though. On a dex stacker you get more than just damage from dex. So that's where I'm going to end this part of the crafting report. I will come back once I've made a decision on... Actually, I think I've made my decision. I think I am going to just keep trying to improve the Crucible tree until I either get it or run out of currency. And if I run out of currency, then I'll just finish crafting it. But I guess I need to hold on to a bit of currency to craft it, because I'll need some essences, and I'll need a bunch of Veiled Chaos Orbs. And I'll need some Orbs of Annulment, and probably a few Exalted Orbs. That's about it. And I'll probably need some Divines for metacrafting, like can't roll caster mods, or suffixes can't be changed, or whatever I end up rolling that works out. The way I originally crafted it, before I scoured off the mods, was I used attack speed essences until I hit tier 1 crit. And that tier 1 crit also came with a poison mod and some junk prefixes that I don't care about. But it had an open prefix. So I thought, if I can annul off the poison, then I can hit suffixes can't be changed and Veiled Chaos Orbit. So that's what I did. I used an Orb of Annulment and I got the poison off of it on the first try, which was lucky. And that's why I said earlier that I think I was just exceedingly lucky in how I crafted this. Because also the next step was on my first Veiled Chaos Orb. After using the Veiled Chaos Orb, I blocked something on the bench. I don't remember what I blocked, probably just physical damage, because I don't need physical damage on it, and that's really common. And I unveiled a prefix, and that prefix was the attacks penetrate % elemental resistances, which was the best possible prefix I could have unveiled. So those two things combined are why I got so lucky on crafting it. And then it also came with like tier 3 cold damage, I think it was, which was fine. I didn't have any real issue with that one way or the other. And then I crafted the crit multi on it, which I might have replaced with double damage at some point. And then there was an open prefix, so I just slammed it with an Exalted Orb and it hit +1 to level socketed gems, which was pretty nice. Right, that was one of the best mods it could have hit there as far as a prefix goes. So it'll be a similar process crafting the next set of mods, something similar to that. I doubt I will get that lucky again, but we'll see. At this point, I've already passed. Like I am so close to the finish line at this point, proportionally. Like the vast majority of this Marathon is behind me. Anyway, like I said, that's the end of this report. So I'll be back with the next one. I think at this point, the next report will just be the finished product.
Okay, here we are. It's finally basically just about done. When I left off the last recording, I was almost on the Crucible tree. I had 4 out of 5 of the nodes that I wanted. The last one was the tier 2 that I said I had used about 15 imprint beasts just trying to get the tier 2. And around the same time, I had actually run out of swords that had the tier 2 node with either 10% attack speed or 5% dexterity. But I did realize that there was one other good tier 2 node that I could use, and I still had plenty of swords with it. So I went and I bought 10 more imprint beasts, and I think I used almost all of them, probably at least 8 of them. But I ended up getting this node, 25% reduced attack speed, attacks with this weapon have 30% chance to deal double damage. This is actually quite good. It might even be better than the other 2 nodes I was trying to get. I didn't really think about it until I had to use it. The 25% reduced attack speed sounds pretty bad, obviously, but you can obviously stack attack speed to make up for it. And more importantly, that 30% chance to deal double damage is a lot of damage. That is straight up 30% more damage. It's basically automatically a bigger DPS increase than the decrease from the reduced attack speed. But also, if you remember, we have this node that reduces enemy stun threshold and gives us endurance charges, and the only thing that matters when you're trying to stun enemies is your top end damage. And so this means that you might even be able to stun much tougher enemies like bosses pretty often. And along the same lines, because this is a dex stacking weapon that deals cold damage, it also increases the threshold of enemies that you can freeze by a lot. So all in all, I think that this might actually be the best node that could be here. This might end up actually being better than the 5% dex or the 10% increased attack speed. So with that, the Crucible tree is done. We have the dex stacking node at the start, we have double damage, we have endurance charge generation, we have elemental penetration, and we have profane ground from Purifying Flame. And then here's the actual weapon. We have tier 1 crit chance, tier 1 crit multiplier, the highest tier of essence attack speed, a perfect roll on elemental resistance penetration from an Ashling mod, crafted cold damage that I kept re-rolling to be perfect, and then a garbage throwaway fire damage mod. One last note in editing here, I cut out another chunk of the crafting journal retrospective because it was almost just a verbatim reiteration of the crafting process that I already went over earlier in the video for crafting the explicit modifiers on the sword. I'm not really sure if this would be something that people want to mirror, I don't know. What I can pretty confidently say, and I have searched the PoE subreddit to double check this, is that in its current state, this sword is already the best dex stacking one-handed sword that has ever existed in Path of Exile. Anyway, I need a break, so that's all for now.